From culture to access and from dreams to reality. Our journey into the cosmos isn't just about rockets and technology. It's about who we are, who gets to go, and how we shape our future beyond Earth. Today we explore the space age that's already here and the one still to come. Our guest today is Inara Tabir, President of the Multiplanetary Society, visionary leader and space culture advocate, dedicated to transforming humanity into a truly multiplanetary species. From bridging industry to elevating space exploration into a cultural movement, to advocating for inclusion and opportunity across society, Inara champions a future where the cosmos belongs to all of us. She's a globally sought speaker, host of multiple space shows, and an inspiring voice for public engagement in space. Inara, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Dan. Glad to be here.
Let's get directly into the core of this interview. My first question to you would be linked to the idea of culture of space. You're talking a lot of it. I'm interested to know, what do you mean when you talk about culture of space? Is it different from the culture we see on Earth?
I think we can go in two directions when we talk about the culture of space, and they're both pretty important. One might be kind of the native or emerging culture within the space communities, and the other is the way that we're shifting culture in this space age. So I can think about, the origins of how things began with space. We had Sputnik go up, and there were two really big reactions to that. One was this sense of awe because humanity had put a star in the sky. And the other was dread. This sense of, some group has put something up there that we don't understand and it could be dangerous. And so out of that emerged this kind of dualistic new era of national defense strategies and proliferation of new kinds of arms. And we had DARPA and NASA emerge, but we also had this sense that anything was possible. We can see that the real kind of acceleration of sci-fi and of technology, and we can see this chain reaction from that moment. Things like Star Trek, for instance, and Star Wars, and the creation of the scientists that emerged from that. A lot of astronauts got their start because they saw sci-fi and they thought, oh, I can make that a reality. So I think that shifted culture in ways that we really don't fully understand yet. But then we also have within the space community kind of these native cultural pockets, if you will. So we had originally kind of government space, this idea that it was a national defense structure or strategy. Then we had this kind of revolution of new space, or actually private space, kind of government adjacent private space with Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman. And then we had the emergence of new space. So we have, Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos. So there's these different ideologies that underpin these movements of technology. And those, I would say, are independent cultures. All of that together is this kind of soup that's trying to congeal, trying to find a direction. And we're still in the process. We're kind of still cooking, as it were.
But can you give us an example of a cultural change that's already happening because of space exploration?
Absolutely. I would say the overview effect is a really good example of one piece of that, and a lot of philosophies that have come out of that. Frank White, he's coined this term and really highlighted this phenomena where astronauts go to space, and when they do, they look back and they see a planet. They don't see the divisions and the borders, and so that would be a cultural shift, I would say. And you can use that to kind of create a new sort of environmentalism or a new sort of geopolitical stance, or a kind of a fundamental background to it. So that would be one. I've met a lot of astronauts. Frank has interviewed so many more, and a lot of them were impacted by that moment of awe. We could see it when William Shatner goes up to space. He comes back down, and there was something magical when you see everyone celebrating and kind of throwing champagne around. He's just having this existential moment of complete awe and dread, and his life changed from that moment. But also people who watched that something changed in us. So I would say these are small pieces of that culture shift.
Inara, you coined the term the eighth continent, talking about the moon. How does this idea help shift perspective about space on Earth?
I actually I had a problem about 12 years ago, 10 years ago. We were doing great things, and this has been a problem reoccurring. We've done some amazing things in the space industry, and oftentimes people will say, why are you wasting money? Why are you wasting resources on that thing that doesn't matter when you could be fixing ecological distress or ethnic conflict or resource scarcity, whatever their kind of perceived need is. They never ask the carpenter why they're not a plumber. They also don't ask this of what I call these established social religions, as it were. So space, or sports rather, fashion, music, entertainment, movies, those sort of industries can spend billions of dollars, and the only thing anyone asks is, when will you entertain me next? So I realized we had a fundamental disconnect with the public. We weren't really making the case. We weren't something wasn't happening. And so I started looking at that, and I think it goes back to those origins. When it started, like I said earlier, it was a national defense strategy. We had a curated messaging. So if anyone in the industry was going to talk to the public, it was like, don't talk to the public. In fact, if you do, you might go to jail. This is all, security clearance locked, and we have people specialized to speak to the public. And those specialized people, they were there to deliver a very curated message, which had all kinds of implications for the government. And so when we went from that kind of very militarized government space focus to the legacy companies like Lockheed Martin and Northrop Grumman, it was no longer don't talk to the public. It was you don't need to speak to the public because the government is your customer. So we lost this connection with the public. And really the only sense of connection was awe, right? We created these gods, these astronauts that were larger than life, that we told the rocket exploding stories. We put them in front of fancy cars, and it worked because we got the whole world dreaming of this like godlike power and this amazing moment where we put someone on the moon. But now we live in a society where people don't want to worship. They want to be included. They want to be part of it. And if they can't have access, then it's not relevant to their lives. So we went too high. We did the Icarus thing, right? We soared way too high. So I tried to figure out how we could reframe this. How could we create a shared myth that people could attach themselves to? And that includes, jobs, right? So we could talk about plumbers in space and welders in space and teachers and artists. And that's one piece of it. But we also have to break this division between Earth and space. So when we talk about it, we do tend to still create this monolithic vision of space as that thing over there. But really, every single day, space weather impacts our daily lives. We can see that weather from the sun has an impact on our technology, for instance. It has an impact on our actual weather. It has an impact on even earthquakes, for instance. We're seeing more and more data on that. So we are impacted daily by what happens in space, and we talk about it as this other place. So what I want to do is reframe it. When I talk about space, I want people to understand that I lay a feast out for you in this beautiful room. And that beautiful room is the cosmos. And every kind of beautiful treat and dancing and music and lovely people to speak to. And you have your face in a corner, and that's Earth. You think it's all there is. And maybe you really like that corner, but if I can just get you to turn around and see all the wonders and the possibilities around you, we realize that it isn't Earth versus space. It's Earth is one small part of that cosmos we're in. And so when I talk about the eighth continent, that's to help demystify and break that barrier between the two and really just make people understand. And really, I mean, the moon is technically still within our atmospheric system. There's a component to our atmosphere called the geocorona, and that extends around the moon. So we can even arguably say that the moon is still within our Earth atmosphere system. And for me, that's very clear. It's the eighth continent. It's just another domain. It's another place we can do things. So maybe you like your small town, maybe you like your country, maybe you like your region, wonderful, but then you still acknowledge there's other places and other possibilities. So that's where really the culture shift. I want to make a culture shift and help people understand that it's not about, like when you go to space, it's not about leaving our world, it's realizing it's just much bigger than just one planet.
That's fantastic, Inara. You mentioned access to space being, it used to be limited to just a few governments, and like you said, but now we have private companies like you mentioned, Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos and many others. We also have universities and even individuals who are getting involved. How do you define access today? I mean, are we really democratizing access or just creating actually new barriers?
I think it's a bit of both. We're in the process now of redefining that access. So, you know, the reality is that rockets are missiles, right? It's the same technology. So we have to be really careful about who has access to that, who can launch things. So that's really, I think, the centerpiece of the issue with access. But also, there's a lot of unresolved, I would say, nuance to going to space. We don't really understand what shape space law will take, how we can enforce that. If someone puts something up into space, technically the country they launch it from is responsible, but how responsible they are and how loopholes might work, we still haven't worked all that out. Michelle Hanlon is doing a really good job, and Leah Doolittle, two colleagues, two women I revere greatly, and there's many others, trying to figure out space law. So there's a lot of reticence to people going to space without control mechanisms in place. But I would say today we do have incredible access. Groups like Moondow, for instance, were able to raise money and send people to space. We have space tourism opening up in a big way. We have groups like Worldview and Space Perspective sending up dirigibles for tourism and for cargo. But we also have, this, I would say, a new field of or new understanding that is open for the possibilities. So if you're going to bring in something for data centers on the moon, that normally would have been a conversation behind closed doors at the highest echelons, but now it's like, a couple people with a business plan might be able to achieve that. Space bases are another one. I'm looking at, privatized space in the sense of smaller organizations with thinner budgets figuring out how to do that. But I think we also can look at some of the bigger leaders like Elon Musk, and he's talking about making the moon accessible to anybody. That I think would be incredible, to where you don't have to have any sort of skill. Right now, it's kind of the equivalent of, if you want to take a plane from Houston to Paris, you should know how to build a plane and fly a plane. And that's just not practical. So it'll be real, and the access will be real when kind of the biggest moron in the room can jump on a machine and go to the moon, and they have no sense of how it worked, and they've got no clearance, and they have no idea, how to work any of it. That's going to be the real access, is when it's super easy for lazy, dumb people to go to space.
And, well, what role should then equity and inclusion play as humanity expands off of Earth? I mean, you mentioned those space tourism thing, and I think we need to be a bit careful about what that is actually really at the moment. First is something that is not really going into outer space. Is just like, how do you call it, that bungee jumping into space? Because you actually literally go there for 11 minutes, full journey, and you're there for 3-4 minutes in zero gravity. I think bungee jumping into space, it's the perfect term. You have to do a selfie and get back. But if you have $1 million to put down, that's the condition. So what I'm saying, what can be done now to make sure that future is truly inclusive?
Absolutely. Well, I want to touch on a couple topics there. So quickly, before we go to the equity part, you talked about space tourism. I completely agree. I think we have this really fake vision of space tourism right now. So when we look at like these parabolic flights, for instance, this is just a plane. It's a nice theme. I'm a fan of these, kind of experiences, but they really aren't space experiences by any means. They can talk about modeling gravity, but to me, it's just a joyride on planet Earth, right? It's more planes than anything. And then when we talk about like the Jeff Bezos flights, or these kind of quick 11-minute hops, they're not really going to space, and I think it's done a lot of damage. It's great if you want to do this. I mean, again, it's another nice experience to have, and you're aiming towards space, but you're really not hitting space. I don't care about the Kármán line. I mean, this is an interesting international agreement to the border, but it doesn't really make a difference to me. You're not going to space. And it's even less, to me, real than if I were to say I went to Texas because I flew to the airport and had a sandwich in the airport. I would arguably say I have never been to Texas if I did just this. And so the same thing, even if you were to get kind of outside our orbit and come back down, I mean, this is not really doing anything meaningful. So what I want to see for space tourism is, let's build a couple hotels on the moon. and let's take people up for 2 weeks at a time, and let's have them do a every fortnight do a ride from one pole to the other to the second hotel, and renew their stay there. Let's real space tourism, but to do that, we need to aspire. And so I think what's good about these kind of you know space tourism things is that it is aspirational. It is getting us aiming in the right direction. And I see it kind of like a child, right? When my daughter was little, when I wanted to teach her to crawl, I would put her toys just out of reach. And so she'd have to really work at it to get to those toys. And, while she was, trying to get to them, she wasn't quite getting there, but that was getting her muscles ready to do that. And so I think that's what we're doing right now is we're getting those muscles ready to make it real. And so there's value in that sense. But the danger is resting on our laurels or being comfortable with that moment. If it's all we do, if we just do the 11-minute rides and repeat that with a few millionaires, we're never quite going to get it. And it hurts us in the public's eye because it goes back to this idea of the elites with lots of money joyriding in space, and it separates us even further from the average person who could never possibly, pay for that ride. So real space tourism incoming, but for now, I don't really see it. I want to be careful not to frame space as some sort of magical element. So if you talk about equity, let's talk about equity on the moon, on Mars, in deep space, on Earth. It's going to be the same, right? We're going to have to work out those ideas. So equity, diversity, inclusion, these concepts, they ring differently across cultures, across time periods, and so that's its own kind of realm of things that we need to figure out. But I will say, the more people that have access to space, the better. The more ideas that we can, kind of realize in space, the better. And I think right now our best bet isn't going to be to dilute how we get to space across the board. It's going to be a few key players, realistically, that break that frontier open for us. And at first, it won't include everybody. At first, it's going to be most likely a joint military mission with private industry. It's going to be heavily mission oriented, heavily subsidized by the government, exclusive in who gets to go. But then once we have the basic infrastructure, so companies like Space Phoenix, for instance, Andrew Parlock and his team are doing amazing new things with heavy manufacturing at scale in space. We need that. We need that baseline infrastructure, which can then allow industries to arise in space. And then, like I said, anybody gets to go.
From what you're saying, I think we are actually now seeing a new reality of space, isn't that? I mean, from every point of view, from technological, economically, culturally, we see a new reality. How close are we, to routine human presence beyond Earth?
2030. I'll go ahead and put my horse in the race here. I would say by 2030, you're going to see average people in space.
Excellent. Do you see space exploration as a continuation of historical trends, or is it just something fundamental in you?
I would say it's rooted in the deepest parts of our soul as a species. It's nothing smaller than that. We are a species that seeks discomfort. I very much disagree with Bill Nye, for instance, when he talks about, not leaving Earth. Why would you go to Mars? Because it's very comfortable here. No, we don't like comfort. We're a species that likes some comfort, but we get very uncomfortable with comfort for too long. So we're the species that climbs over our dead friends to get to the top of Mount Everest. We're the species that braves waves. We're the species that braves cold. We're the species that, as soon as we have a little bit of comfort, we're like, what's over there? So we're at our best when we're pushing our boundaries and finding new frontiers. It's some sort of core drive in humanity. And I would say it goes back to that root drive in evolution. It's evolve or die. It isn't get comfortable and then kind of keep at it. It's as soon as you're comfortable, seek the next hardship, because that hardship's where you're going to grow. So we are a species that needs to expand and needs to stretch. And that's where we're driven. I would say expanding into the cosmos is our birthright. It's our duty as a species to continue going. And when you look at it again, it's like I said, leaving this planet, going to space isn't leaving our world, it's leaving the planet. It's going out into the further reaches. It's maturing. And there are billions and trillions and even crazy number higher of planets and species out there, no doubt. And we have an obligation to carry the seeds of life with us. If I were to say, you have the only medicine that village over there needs, you would have a moral obligation, in my opinion, to take that medicine to that village. We have the seeds of life, and we don't know how scarce that is. We don't know how rare it is. I anticipate it being quite common ultimately, but as far as distance goes, not so much. So when we have this spark of life, we have an obligation to spread that into the cosmos. And so I think that's where our mandate comes from.
Oh, yeah. From what you're saying, I'm just thinking many people are considering today that we have a duty to keep exploring and finding a way to leave the planet because the planet would eventually disappear. Well, long term, in the long term. But if we don't make it disappear, it will naturally disappear once the sun will expand too much. But from what you're saying, and I love this idea, you're saying actually that human being is by its nature meant to explore. As you said, the routine makes us get bored very quickly, so we need to explore. I love that. I love that idea. Inara, this pushes us now through another. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was saying we can see it in our children. So if you have a small child that can't quite crawl yet, we all know that moment as parents when suddenly they have the ability to move and they're going to move. They're going to climb and crawl and run and jump into things and explore things and put things in their mouth. And children are naturally what we are, right? They, as soon as you can, they do. And they want to see everything. They want to explore everything. They want to figure it all out. And I don't think we ever lose that. I think that's really what we continue to do as a species. We just get a little less clumsy, hopefully.
I love that. As an educator myself, I'm very fond of this idea that we are actually born, we have it in our DNA, this exploration reflex, I would call it, because it's coming naturally, isn't it? And now, the first thing we do as babies is to start exploring. First with our fingers, then with our mouth, and then we start seeing. I love that. Getting back to what we were talking about now, we may have a little bit later the opportunity to get back to this education aspect of it. But if I had to go up there at some point, what about educating us properly and not going there as colonizers, but as merely explorers? Let's get back to our point here, to space exploration and obviously the space race, Inara. When people hear today space race, they still think Cold War competition, Russians, Americans. But what does the new space race look like now in the 21st century? Is it a race at all, or is something else?
Maybe. I mean, I think that the origins of this, right, this idea of a space race, it does. It goes back to the Soviet American Cold War. The media was very, very engaged in the 60s during this, era of Apollo and racing the Soviets. And that was the framework. That was kind of the playbook that they created, the media created to talk about these things. And so there was this long gap where it really wasn't newsworthy. We had, like, let's say, the 80s, 90s, early 2000s. There wasn't a lot of newsworthy connection to the space industry. And so when we pick it back up, we get exciting again. And Elon Musk is doing these crazy new things, and reusability is coming in. They didn't really have a culture to lean back on media wise, except for that space race concept. And so I think we did get where we could have just gotten this idea of Blue Origin and SpaceX, which is really the two they were putting against each other, just two companies doing great things and very different things, actually. We got, SpaceX versus Blue Origin, America versus the Soviets. It framed it just like it had been before, but it really isn't that, right? We have a lot of crossover between these different companies, and a lot of people are coming in and out of them, and there's a lot of collaboration behind the scenes that doesn't really make it to the press. So I think we have healthy competition, but we have more of an industry focus, right? It's about platforms and products and services, and ultimately it's about who's going to create that infrastructural layer, because we don't have a space industry, to be honest. When we talk about a space industry, we have a terrestrial industry focused on space to some degree, but it still is very heavily terrestrial. It depends on all of our terrestrial infrastructure. We'll have an actual space industry when we have infrastructure that allows for multiple industries. So I think a donut shop will be part of the space industry, right? We'll stop talking about space as a goal or as a product, and it will become just a domain. And it'll be a series of domains. So you'll have a donut shop, you'll be in space, so you'll be a space company, right? So I think that's where we need to reframe it, from space race to this goal that we share to build out these networks of industries in another domain.
Amazing. Yes, that makes perfectly sense. As you say, the difference between what's happening today and what happened during the Cold War is that We are now out of that paradigm where everything was national. Everything was about going up there quickly and put the flag. Indeed, now we see, and I'm happy to mention that, we see a situation where despite quarrels on Earth, let's mention nothing but the war in Ukraine, for instance, which set up a huge media stunt against Russia, for instance. Well, I'm happy to say that that did not happen at all on the ISS. Americans have been collaborating with Russians perfectly, and, as you say, when you're up there and you look back, you see no borders, you see no wars, you see nothing like that. How do collaboration and competition coexist in the current era of space exploration?
Yeah, there's this moment that happens, if you leave your country and you go to Paris, for instance, and there's a huge throng of people, huge crowds of people, and you don't quite understand what's being said, and then suddenly you hear your native language. Um, you pop up, and that person's the most important person in the crowd, and suddenly you're connected in a way that you wouldn't be normally. You go have coffee, maybe you go tour together, maybe you get to know each other. Then later on, you've got this friendship. These kind of things happen because of moral distance, right? So if those same two people, let's say they're Americans and they're both from New York, and they cross each other on a street in New York, maybe they wouldn't even make eye contact. Maybe they wouldn't even care about the other person, but suddenly something is a shared moment for them and it connects them. I would say when you're in the soup together, it has a sense, it has a way of bonding people very quickly, and culture, shared experience merges very quickly. So when you're in space, everything is trying to kill you. It's a little bit worse than Australia, not much worse, but a little bit worse than Australia. Everything's trying to kill you, and you're all up there together, and it no longer matters who your mother is, what land you came from, what language you speak. Is your oxygen going to be okay? Is a micrometeorite going to impact you? These are the things you share suddenly, and it consolidates you. So I would say what we can see is when we get up there in that soup, it's going to change us. It's going to change fundamentally how we relate to each other. It's going to bridge that moral distance. It's going to create a new identity spectrum that we don't have now. It's very easy now to say, I was born here, here's my passport, this is the holiday, these are the holidays I celebrate, these are my cultural expectations. But when you get up in space, it's going to be a whole new set of how we connect. That to me is amazing. That to me is beautiful because we don't quite know what's going to happen. We can send Russia, China, America, Iran up there. They can all have their own colonies. They can all create their. But eventually, what's going to happen is people are going to recoalesce around new ways of building culture together, and that's exciting.
Inara, let's bridge to culture and reality, shall we? We have popular cultures, field music, podcasts, and so on. They shape how people imagine space. You mentioned earlier sci-fi as well, or sci-fi movies. How important is cultural storytelling to real progress in space, in your opinion?
Paramount. There's no better word. The real connection, and especially sci-fi, right? Storytelling at our essence, we are the stories that we repeat. We're the stories that we live in. We're the stories that we hear, that we live. So, I would say sci-fi is a good example, right? I like to say the very first sci-fi happened when a cave person went outside and looked up at the stars and went, "What is that? What is going on?" And there was something just quite a little bit beyond their ability to comprehend or understand. And so in that moment where there's a gap, they start to draw on the walls, scribbling their ideas about what this might mean. In the abstract, it creates this beautiful void that has to be filled. And so culture starts to take shape around that. And we can talk about the constellations and the stories, right? Where we might see a star and understand that, plasma up there, someone else who doesn't understand it, we see creatures and stories around it. And then culture emerges from that. And there's an interconnection between that new culture that emerges and then doing, because someone goes, okay, you made this story. Now, what do we do with that story? How does that define us? Do we create religion or holidays around that? Does that tell us to go do something? Is there a new planting season? And we can see the same relationship between Star Trek, for instance, and a lot of scientists that emerged. We had this golden age of space that we talked about that inspired people, the Sputnik era, I would call it. And then Star Trek emerges. And it dreams a little bit further. It goes, okay, what does this quite mean? Like, what would it be like to be up there? We don't quite know, but here's what I think. And so Gene Roddenberry is scribbling his heart's desires on the walls of our civilization. And we get from that culture shift, social shift. We get to talk about racialism. We get to talk about gender equality. We get to talk about political alignment. We get to talk about these kind of taboo subjects in a way that's in a new sort of setting where it's a little bit safer to talk about it. And then from that, so many scientists, so many astronauts took their inspiration and went, I want to make that a reality. So the stories really are what fuel us. They're what give us permission to decide how we shape our world. And so the more stories, the bigger stories we can tell, the more possibilities we can create and bring to fruition.
In your opinion, how can creator responsibility influence public engagement into it?
I think that starts at the basis, right? What I really have a peeve with is fear mongering. I work with a lot of amazing franchises. I've worked with the Orville cast and a lot of the Star Trek casts. Those are, kind of been my highlights. And it's hopeful and it's beautiful and it's fun. And I think we need more of that. Where I don't really like it so much is when I see this face-eating monster, alien kind of thing, the fear mongering. Really, I would say it's in line with like racial hate and racial fear mongering. So if I make a movie where it's like, okay, that person has a different color skin, they're going to get you and your children, people understand the framing of that is dangerous and damaging, and it's not so great. But we do the same thing now with the idea of aliens. If we meet aliens, I'd like to think that we have kind of a calm baseline to examine that relationship. But instead, right now, we have this preponderance of they're going to get you, they're going to eat your children, it's going to be terrible. And so that's unfortunately very popular. Those sort of stories are very popular. People, for whatever reason, like to be scared. But it's doing a lot of damage. So what we need is we need a sense of responsible story. And of course, make all the stories you want. Tell whatever stories you like. Tell the horror stories if you want to. But what I want to highlight and what I want to encourage is a sense of wonder and hopefulness in our sci-fi, because that's how we get the good stuff. No one ever sees a horror movie with a space-sucking monster and goes, you know what? I could build something amazing in space. So we need a kind of catalyzing sci-fi and catalyzing stories, and we need to do it in a concerted way. I would say, as a national defense strategy, we should be funding more sci-fi. So a good example of this was Stargate. Stargate was actually funded by the Air Force. The Joint Chiefs of Staff oversaw the script writing. A lot of people don't realize this. So the very first series of Stargate was a joint operation between Air Force and Hollywood. And it was amazing. We got a lot of really great stories. You still get to have your suspense and your drama, but all in all, it was exploratory. And I think we need something similar today, maybe a new Stargate series with Space Force. That would be great. And those kind of team ups would be integral.
That's amazing. I like that. You're the president of the Multiplanetary Society. You're working in close relation with an array of space experts and space personalities. Let's talk of lunar bases and Mars colonies and asteroid mining. Based on your close experience, which of these are closest to reality and which are still primarily visions?
Well, right now the moon is huge, right? So I'm known for my Mars-centered philosophies. I want the moon to be an amazing place. I want lots of structures there. I want people living there. But when it comes to safety, the same existential crisis that kind of threatens Earth can threaten the moon more easily. I think we need to be out into Mars at least, and then look at interstellar space as our next big focal point. The sooner we get out of the solar system, the better. And I like to think about or talk about our solar system as a firing range. If I were to have a gun range and I'm standing with my gun and down there's the target, there's all kinds of signs saying, don't stand between the target and the gun. It's not a great place to be. But we have two asteroid belts. We have the inner asteroid belt just outside of Mars, and we have the Kuiper belt just outside our solar system. And these are slinging massive continent-sized rocks at times at us. Even the small ones can do a lot of damage. And so you have these two firing ranges, throwing projectiles towards us. And if we talk about it that way, it's very clear we really shouldn't be in the path of these things. We need to be clear of them. So I'm not satisfied until we're clear of the solar system, until we have interstellar ships that can maneuver real time, that can watch for threats. But I think Mars is the baseline, right? We have to at least be there. I like it because we have the asteroid belt there for resource extraction. When we talk about scarcity, I like to say scarcity ends where space begins, because it's all out there waiting for us. But that being said, we need to get to the moon. It's right there. It's just so close, and we can resupply very easily. So I think as soon as possible, that needs to be a reality. And we do see it. We see now Elon Musk has kind of temporarily retrained his focus from Mars to the moon. Some people were very upset by this. I'm fine with it, because as long as he engineers for Mars and aims for the moon, I'm good, because that means that Mars is still happening, now. And then Jeff Bezos, same thing. He's kind of scuttled his space tourism focus and is aiming for the moon. This is a big sign. Major players kind of in real time together aiming for the moon. We know that there's an emission central movement behind it. So this has been mandated, and that means there's going to be a very quick settlement of the moon. So I would say no later than 2028. I'll make my call. I don't think we're going to see it any later. I think we're going to have people full time on the moon by 2028, specialists, and then very quickly 2030 we'll have regular people up there.
Excellent, excellent. Let's get a bit personal and visionary. You talk a lot about space as belonging to all of humanities. How does this vision include redefining how we govern and manage celestial bodies?
So that's going to be the tricky one. We can look at early settlements. It's really easy. I think it's too easy to talk about kind of the European settlement of the Americas, right? It's a little too easy. I think we need to go even further back and talk about maybe our leaving of Africa and spreading out into the world, or much more baseline. So when we go to space, everything's wide open. There's just nothing out there to really stop us or define us or rein us in, right? We can settle asteroids, planets, moons, open space. We can build space platforms. So it's going to be a matter of lots and lots of different cultures arising, right? So ships are a good example. Sailing ships might be even the best example. You had people that went private and went onto the ocean, and maybe they traded, maybe they were pirates, but they had their own shipboard laws and rules that you live by. And maybe you didn't like it, so you left, or maybe you got killed because you tried to leave. But I think we're going to see the same thing, more of like libertarian islands in space, where you'll have lots of experiments on what's going to be legal and how things operate and what our culture is. But where we're going to see some rails come in are things like safety. If there's a distress signal sent out, we're going to need to have some sort of baseline of we answer those calls, because if we don't answer them, they're not going to answer them. So that we'll start seeing those moments of connection, and then you'll have to negotiate the different rule structures. Same thing with trade. When we start trading, these kind of rabble zones, I call them, where different systems collide, even if they're temporarily, they're going to have to figure out how to negotiate their differences. And then that will see the emergence of new legal systems.
I was just about to mention about that, because that makes perfectly sense now what you're saying. So, in your opinion, what models of governments could ensure peaceful and fair space futures?
That I don't know. I think we're going to have to be technologically based. There's this concept that technology is really the origin of culture shift, right? So as a technology comes in, culture shifts based on that technology, never usually the other way around. So we see the internet, for instance, the internet emerged, and then from that culture shifted. So it'll depend on the technology, honestly. It'll depend. I don't know. That's an answer I don't have for you. Like what government systems can really do that? That's hard. We can talk about space law, and I know lots of people who are talking about it. We have a lot of concepts behind it, but we're not going to know till we get into it what that's going to look like. There's this idea that no plan survives engagement with reality, and that's the
Yeah.
perfect
And
example.
I think you're right, but I don't want to put it on. I want to make the difference between government and governance. So my question was more about the models of governments. But what you're saying is, I think, it's paramount. It's the legal aspect of it, because there are laws that are meant to be put in place. Now, who's going to enforce those laws, in your opinion?
Well, I think the big thing we can talk about is mission versus market. Essentially, it'll be a mission-oriented move at first. It'll be a military move at first. So we will have a very military structure, boots on the ground on the moon. It'll be private industry assisting and being led by the military. That's the reality. So whether it's Blue Origin or SpaceX or others, the military will be the backbone and kind of the counterbalance to any private industry at the first. So that mission orientation is going to dictate the governance models that we have initially, because freedom is a great under the right conditions, but when you're talking about something as dangerous and as precarious as setting up a new civilization on a planet without oxygen, on a body without oxygen like the moon, you really don't have enough room for too much of that. So it'll be mission oriented first, and that will be the governance style. Then we can move to more freedoms, more market orientation. It'll become more, civilized, more civilian, as it were.
Yeah, yeah. So basically, it's like bringing private companies to the table to negotiate future contracts. In that is the guarantee that they are going to respect the terms of the contracts more than threatening them that we put them in jail for if they not.
For sure, I would say that if you're a private industry and you go up onto the moon, which will be mission oriented and led by the military, if you do anything that endangers the mission, they will shut you down. It doesn't matter what the law is about your ownership of the resources or your business license, they will shut you down because the mission will have to come first. So I think that's going to be, we'll have all kinds of debates over whether that's right or not, but it's going to be the utilitarian reality.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You mentioned ownership of resources. Now, we all know that there is a treaty out there which is fundamentally against ownership of space bodies like the moon, like Mars. So we can't take ownership of land over there, but you can take ownership of the resources over there. So, how these work together, in your opinion?
I think that's all going to fly out the window. I think we can. This is where I will be. I am comfortable talking about like the American settlement kind of paradigm. There was a time when they said if you can go out west and you can claim some land, it's yours, and it created this huge push westward. The best thing we could do is open space up and say if you can go get it, it's yours. That's going to encourage so many people. I mean, we talk about ROI, right? When we talk about investment, investors want to know what's your risk, where's your exit, what am I going to get from this? It's very hard to make any case in the space, industry or bubble of industries with investors. It's really difficult. But if I say to you, if you go there, you get it. That is very, very exciting to people because there's all sorts of resources we know about and lots of resources we don't know about. So space mining, space energy, data centers, territory in general, hotels on the moon. I would love to see them just say, look, let's do it. Go get it. It's yours. And maybe open up licenses for people to go and claim resources in space. That would be the best thing we could do temporarily.
But then it's another part of this or side of the story that pounds me, and that's are we not just repeating the harm we used to do as a species when we, as you said, we were starting to rush towards west, killing the locals on the way to get their reaches?
Well, I would say that's where the analogy falls apart because there aren't any indigenous people on the moon. There's no one to kill. That's where it really isn't colonization. I talk about migration, exploration, and settlement. So it isn't a good parallel to the American West in that sense. There isn't one group dominating another. But that's been really the key, right? Throughout history, that's what we've done. When we go someplace, we take it, we kill, and that's been the natural cycle because the real origins of that paradigm are that we are in a closed system and we're an ever expanding species. So no matter if I were to settle every border dispute on this planet today, if I were to make every ethnic group happy, every political boundary was perfect and everyone was satisfied, in 10 years, we'd have war again because people would expand and they would need to. So that's where we're dealing with that. In space, I think that's one of those fundamental shifts. That's where that cycle really will change. Because if you're on the moon, there's plenty of room right now. And by time you're going to fill up that space, there's a lot more room outside of the moon. There's a lot more room in the asteroid belt and other planets and other moons. So I don't think we'll deal with the same situation. And it's like, why am I going to go kill you when there's a whole planetoid I can take up? I don't need to come for your resources. I have plenty of other resources right now. So in that sense of abundance, we don't need to. And I will say that is really the difference, right, between a scarcity mindset and an abundance mindset. If I were to say, hey, Dan, come over to my house. We're going to have a few friends over. I'd love to have you over. And you come over, and maybe there's 5 or 6 other people. And I laid a nice plate of sandwiches. It's like 20 sandwiches, plenty for everyone. And we're all just talking. You have your sandwich, and it's all calm. Now, if I were to kidnap you and throw you in a cell with like 5 other people, and I throw 3 sandwiches in that cell, and I say, that's all you're getting for the next month, you will kill a stranger over an extra sandwich. And so that's where that resource kind of paradigm is of abundance versus scarcity. On this planet Earth, we have lots of resources, but we still have a scarcity mindset because it's limited. When we get to space, it's the nice social gathering. There's plenty for everyone. We'll have our skirmishes, but resources, they're just so plentiful at the moment. We don't have to worry about that for a long time. We will later. Of course, it will happen again later.
Abundance versus scarcity. That makes me think, about the following. You mentioned abundance in space. So everybody will be a new gold rush, yes, towards getting that asteroid mining done properly. But ultimately, why would we do that is to bring that resources to Earth, I believe. Yeah. So where it has a value at the moment, yes. If I found an asteroid in gold, that will mean if I bring it to Earth, it will have value at the price gold has on Earth. But in the meantime, at the same time, if I bring like, I don't know, 2 billion tons of gold on Earth, that gold will face inflation. It won't have any value at all anymore, isn't it?
There's this moment when you're dating, when you're a teenager, let's say you're 17, 18 years old and you have your first partner, you're very, very excited to bring them back to your parents' house to meet your parents, right? But when you mature and you get married, the most exciting thing is you start your own home together. So it's same thing with the resources. I think at first it'll be very exciting to talk about, we can do data centers in space and it's we don't have to worry about cooling and it'll be cost effective and we can have more data on the planet. We can talk about satellites and we're very excited about bringing back, helium-3. We're very excited about bringing back gold, maybe, or diamonds from, whatever we want from space back to this planet. But very quickly, once we're there and we're really set up, it's very silly to bring it back to the planet. It's very costly to do that. Why? Why would you do it? Better to move everyone off planet. And this is where I got very inspired. My real origin in space was two things. I grew up in a very small town. I was in 12 foster homes. There was really no opportunity. We had a power plant and we had some cattle ranching, but I didn't see a future for myself outside this town. I didn't know like what the heck I was going to do with my life. And then something really magical happened for me. I stumbled upon this little magical portal. It was a box of National Geographics in the thrift store, and it was every magazine from 1960 to 1993. And I poured through this magazine, and for the first time, I was just like inspired by the possibilities of what I could do. And I had to get out. It was really this driving force of if all this is out there, if these tribes and astronauts and dinosaurs and the RLC, if all this is out there, I need to go figure it out and see where I can be part of this. And then I interlibrary loaned, that dates me, interlibrary loaned a book called The High Frontier by Gerard K. O'Neill. That really gave me my mission in life. Gerard K. O'Neill was so visionary. He talked about the ability to move people off planet, to move heavy industry off planet. And he asked one really important question. And that was really what defined his movement, I would say, is a planet the best place for the human species? And the answer is no. We are not made for this planet. People will talk about us destroying the planet and how we need to keep it pristine. But there's an inherent arrogance behind that concern. And that's that we think the planet was made for us. We think it's this ideal world that was made for us, and we have a duty to safeguard it and to preserve it in that state. But what the reality is there's a very small window of time where a species like us can emerge here and thrive here, and that window is closing very rapidly. We can definitely mitigate some of the damage we're doing. We can definitely do better as far as being shepherds of the environment, but ultimately, it's arrogance to think that we should and can stop that wheel from turning. So there was a time when oxygen wasn't even on this planet, when other life forms that didn't need oxygen were the dominant life forms. That will change again. So when we talk about the planet, I don't want to be so focused on it that we think we can keep it in some sort of stale format. It's going to shift. The pressure systems are going to shift. The weather systems are going to shift. The soil content's going to shift. The oxygen levels are going to shift. This planet is going to cycle over to the next group of species, and we're going to die. And that's the reality. So I think our focus needs to be to get out there and create the ideal environments. And temporarily, we can move heavy industry off the planet and preserve this beautiful place. We can stop doing the damage we're doing, and we can go to worlds that are empty and void that need life, and we can be life bringers rather than disruptors.
That's ever so interesting, Inara. Literally, there are so many ideas now springing to my mind because what we are saying is we have a duty actually to invest and to keep up space exploration alive, and we will. You mentioned, first of all, it's in our nature to explore. Now, you mentioned we have to do it because we're going to be pushed to do it earlier or sooner or later to leave this planet, this beautiful planet at the moment, because it won't survive anyhow. Now, let's go back a notch to, while we are still on this planet, while we are preparing to go off this planet, let's talk education. And how do you see in the immediate future, do we really need a shift into educating young generations, into teaching young generations to be polyvalent, but also to be permissive to integration?
Yeah, I think it starts with an understanding that instead of talking about a space industry, we should, Dr. Daniel Tompkins and I, we came up with this concept we called the Hidden Space Program. And it was this idea that we could infiltrate all kinds of industries, and we've done really well with this, and non-space related, and get them to turn a little bit of their focus towards space. And this can be widened. And what I want to do is I want to get all of these different industries and movements to start thinking about their space strategy. So they don't need to call themselves a space company or be part of the space industry. Any company out there can have a space strategy. And I think that's first, right? So this understanding's first. And with that, once we understand that that's going to be the reality, our educational system has to be shifted to keep up with that. And we can look at the internet, we can look at AI, these big movements and these big changes, and we can see that both times education was sorely behind and never really caught up. I would say that education today, especially in America, I'll use the reference I understand, it still isn't prepared for the internet. It has not shifted to really focus on the ways that you can make money online, the ways that the internet's used for supply chain and logistical support and any of these key components to a business. We still haven't shifted. And the problem with America is that the educational system is very siloed. If I said tomorrow, hey, we need to implement this new curriculum, I can't do it nationally. I can't even do it statewide. I can't even do it in a district. There are so many levels of gatekeeping and authority over education that you can't make sweeping changes. You can't have a national strategy for education with the schools. So what we have to do is we can't wait for that to change. We have to create supplemental or decentralized educational strategies. And for that, I would say summer courses, summer camps, space camps, online curriculum, maker spaces, analog training facilities. So a good example would be, to set up in an area where there isn't a lot of money for science, there isn't a lot of STEM education. We could build an analog training facility. In one of these states, I'll say New Mexico would be a really good choice for that. And then you could offer, as part of that, commercialized analog training facility, you could offer science labs and hands-on training for youth. I'd like to see something called the Nova Cadets stood up. You can call it whatever you want, but it's a concept I came up with. Basically a scouting organization, like Girl Scouts, Boy Scouts, but for space, where we focus on space domain awareness, for instance. Kids can understand what cislunar space means, what the strategic value of cislunar space is, and then we can very concertedly pipeline them either into private space industry or Space Force. And so we can have those two pathways, and I think you can pair up with these space companies and Space Force, because a lot of the times what they're saying is we can't hire qualified foreigners because of a lot of the restrictions on the industry, and the local populace hasn't been equipped to be the right employees. So instead, why don't we do it the other way around? Why don't we, instead of waiting for that lucky break and finding the right employees, why don't we create them? Why don't the space companies get together and we will design curriculum and we'll implement that curriculum? So if I go to SpaceX or Blue Origin and I say, show me what your best employee looks like walking in at 18, 19, 20 years old. What skills do they have? What mindset do they have? What background do they have? And then you can fund us and we'll implement that curriculum in a decentralized manner. So your kids can be on video games. We can do gaming as a way of educating them. We can have maker spaces. We can have summer courses. We can have night courses. We can create supplemental educational platforms so that when we don't have them in schools, we have pathways for them. And I think very quickly, you're going to see that parents that prioritize these decentralized educational outlets, their kids are going to thrive and the word's going to get around and you're going to want to be part of that. So I think that's where, if we have a sit down, a national council of private space companies and Space Force, and we sit down and we work that method out, we can deploy that broadly across the country. And then we do have a national educational space strategy, and that can be done across the globe.
Inara, you speak firsthand from your knowledge here, and I invite all our followers to visit the Multiplanetary website. I put the title here on the screen, because you have there a lot of information about projects that Multiplanetary Society is running right now. There are projects about Spacecast, the Star Reach, the Nova Academy you mentioned, with the Nova Cadets. the project named Launchpad, and there are so many others. So I invite everybody listening to us and following us to have a look and to get into it. There are so many things I still want to talk to you, but our time is up. I just want to thank you for sharing your insight and vision from culture and access to new realities and future to human exploration. It's been eye-opening and so inspiring. I hope we could make it again, make it like a part 2 session, because you really are such an inspiring person. And I really think our auditors, our followers really need input from people like yourself.
My pleasure, Dan. Absolutely. And I'm teaming up now with Jamie Higginbotham at Project Tomorrow. So you can follow my new work there with her. We're going to have some really, really fun things ahead for the year. So you can follow us there as well.
To our listeners, if you enjoyed this conversation, hit subscribe, like, and share. And above all, stay curious about the cosmos and keep looking up.
Hey, space dreamers, this is Dan Profir, broadcasting live from highway to space. Strapping tight, we're ready to ignite on a journey through the cosmos. Stars shining bright from the earth below to the skies above. Highway to space, where we dream and love. Astronauts and dreamers, together we'll soar, exploring the universe, always wanting more with a passion that fuels us light years away. Join the adventure, let's seize the day. Highway to space, come and join the ride with stories untold. Let your dreams be your guide. Futures unfolding in the depths of the night. Highway to space, let your spirit take flight. Let your spirit take flight. Crash, echoing the voices of stars, science and art. We're breaking down bars from Mars to the asteroids. We'll never be still, unraveling mysteries fueled by the thrill. With scientists, artists, and thinkers galore, dreaming tomorrow. There's so much in store. Every episode, we're charting new ground together, exploring our passion unbound. Highway to space, come and join the ride with stories untold. Let your dreams be your guide. Futures unfolding in the depths of the night. Highway to space, let your spirit take flight. Let your spirit take flight. Galaxies cold with wonder so vast. The future is bright, our dreams hold fast. Together we'll reach for the stars and beyond. Join the revolution of which we're so fond. It's too late, it's time to awake on this high.